The Gloriana Set by ThebeMoon. Read by LMX Mabella. Chapter 2. Translations. It was still dark when Hermione woke the next morning. She felt for a wand and pointed it at the watch she'd attached to the bedpost with a sticking charm. 6 a.m. Excellent. 30 minutes to record her thoughts and plan her day. It was important to keep a disciplined mind. She pulled out a muggle notebook and held the lit wand over the cover's black letters, spelling out LOOP for Life Organization Optimization Plan. How quiet it was, only the faintest sighing of trees outside, the rattle of casements. She breathed slowly, 5 seconds in, count 5 seconds, out. I am an unruffled pond. A relaxation technique? Hermione blinked. Why did she need a relaxation technique? She'd just woken up, for Merlin's sake. She looked at the watch again, 6:10. What happened to that 10-minute? Now she was behind. She cracked open her loop journal, writing the date and time. All right now. 5 things to look forward to today. 1. A Hogwarts breakfast with sausage and fried tomatoes. 2. Advanced Ancient Runes. A new 30-minute seminar taught by McGonagall before first period each morning. An excellent way to start the day. 3. Lunch? No, not lunch. She'd already written breakfast. A walk around the lake. Yes, she would walk around the lake. 4. A visit to Hagrid with Ron. Or maybe without Ron. But Hagrid would expect Ron too. Well, he'd just have to deal with it. It wasn't her job to make Ron do things anymore. Hermione gnawed on her mucker pen cap. What would it be like to be with someone she didn't feel responsible for? Who sometimes felt responsible for her? She could hardly imagine it. She turned her attention back to the journal, trying to think of a 5th thing to look forward to. She couldn't just leave it blank. Ah, yes, 5. The library's forbidden section. She had a list of dark topics she wanted to research. Blood potions, mind labyrinths, screaming rain. It was a pretty sparse list, bleak even. Breakfast, class, a walk, a visit, the library. She sighed, wishing she could just take her nudes now and be done with it. Well, she had to do more than study for nudes. She couldn't just drift along this year muttering about screaming rain. Just because she didn't want to be Hogwarts' official bossy know-it-all anymore didn't mean she wanted to be the creepy shadow that sighed all the damn time. She needed to find a way to make this year count. Energized, Hermione pulled herself out of bed and prepared for the day. Her hair took some extra time to get ready, but she wanted to make the effort. Fleur had found some magical potion that smoothed her dark curls into soft ringlets if she applied it evenly enough. A swipe of lipstick, a quick pressing charm to her uniform shirt. Appearances were important. She'd had enough of sloppiness, running around disheveled, too busy studying to eat properly. She was finished with that. Nobody was going to take her seriously if she didn't take herself seriously. She used to believe if she just worked harder than anyone else, was more stubborn than anyone else, people would recognize her merit. She knew better now. A string of outstandings wouldn't make her blood any less muddy to some people. Fuck them! She was finished driving herself for others' approval. That wasn't how she'd get what she wanted. Not that she knew what she wanted. She had no idea, really. Well, she'd figure it out eventually. She envied Ron and Ginny, actually. Weasleys always knew exactly what they wanted, where they belonged. There was no ambivalence. Even Harry knew what he wanted. To be an aura to capture the evil and protect the weak, and perhaps then justify the fact that he had lived. As if defeating Voldemort wasn't enough. Even after all her primping, it was only 7:30, and Hermione knew from experience that Lavender and Ginny, her 2 roommates, would shoot out of bed at 8 a.m. in a panic, dashing from bathroom to trunk. She fed Crookshanks, then drifted to the window overlooking the Quidditch pitch, its broad green lawn shining with dew, the sun pecking over the mountains beyond. She put her elbows on the sill, holding her chin in her hands, watching the trees sway. What was that? A small black form shot out from behind a tower, a figure in a black cloak, its hood up on a broom. Hermione had her wand out without realizing it, bracing herself for attack, but the figure merrily looped and swirled in the air, apparently randomly. Ah, of course, a Quidditch player. Probably getting some last-minute practice before the trials this first week. Ginny had talked of nothing else. She was the Gryffindor Quidditch captain this year. Another letter that had irritated Ron, who felt he deserved the position. Hermione smiled at the very thought of Ron leading a Quidditch team, red-faced and shouting, "Are you mental? Hit the ball, I said!" Her eyes continued to follow the flyer's graceful patterns. Quidditch bored her stupid, but even she could tell this was no slouch. The flyer reminded her of Harry and Ginny, those complicated loops and sudden descents. She saw no pattern to it. What was the flyer chasing? She had her answer. A silver snitch suddenly appeared, hitting the window and bouncing off, then hovering just inches from the glass. Hermione ducked behind the curtain, not wanting to be seen. What was that? asked a sleepy voice. Ginny's hat stuck out of her bed curtains. Nothing, Hermione said, slipping her wand into her skirt pocket and picking up her black robe. What time is it? 8 o'clock. Shit! Ginny leaped out of bed, wearing one of Harry's Quidditch shirts. Lavender, it's 8! Shit! She grabbed the toiletries bag and towel and ran out of the room. Eek! Lavender cried, leaping out of bed frantically, digging in her trunk. Hermione kissed Crookshanks on the head, picked up her book and headed downstairs. Her toes tapped the steady rhythm on the curving stone staircase to the common room, where only Neville stood, rooting through his own bag. Hey, Hermione, lend me a quill? He asked, offering up that new slow smile. Not a bad way to start the morning. I can't, I only have 2, she said. She made a conscious effort that morning not to pack a dozen extra quills for forgetful friends. I'll wait here for you, she said with a smile. Or... She pulled out a wand and transfigured a crumbled ball of parchment into a quill. Why didn't I think of that? Thanks, Hermione. Neville slung an arm around her shoulder. Since when was he tall enough to do that? And she smiled up at him. What are you looking forward to today? She asked as they walked towards the Great Hall. Maybe she'd get some ideas for tomorrow's list. I don't know. Breakfast? Me too, she grinned. I know. Double advanced topology is this afternoon, he said. We're going to grow poison pansies and fire-breathing snapdragons. They're both pretty tricky. The pansy seeds can't be touched, and when they bloom, you can't breathe the pollen. Hermione felt better. He wasn't the only one with a lame list. The Great Hall was fairly quiet as usual, filled with heavy-eyed students spooning porridge and munching toast. Hermione had nearly finished when Ron, Ginny, and Lavender appeared, and Ron was too busy eating to give her more than one baleful look. She smiled brightly, which drew his pale red eyes down further, but he said nothing. She slowly peeled an orange, her legs crossed at the ankles and swinging under the table, looking around the Great Hall, eyes travelling over the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables. A tall, dark Slytherin, Blake Sabini, walked past with a fluid grace. Her gaze turned upwards at the hall's yellow and orange-streaked magical sky. You're not reading, Hermione, said Ginny beside her. You always read at breakfast, preparing for morning classes. Hermione shrugged. I'm perfectly prepared. She popped an orange slice into her mouth. Ron's jaw sagged, revealing half-chewed sausage. Ginny's eyes narrowed. Are you feeling all right? Perfectly all right, Hermione said, her attention suddenly drawn by a tussle at the door. Malfoy had apparently finished eating and now stood facing the tables with his back to the Great Hall's open doorway, finically straightening his left cuff. A crowd of first-years peered through a doorway beyond him, wanting to enter, but too afraid to pass the dreaded Death Eater. Malfoy looked around the hall with hooded eyes and noticed Hermione watching. He winked at her, then began straightening the other cuff as the crowd behind him grew. Hermione looked at the teacher's table, but even McGonagall was absorbed by her porridge and didn't look inclined to get involved. Malfoy, Ginny hissed, eyes still narrowed. Somebody should do something, Neville said. Head boy Ernie Macmillan stomped over to the door and began remonstrating with Malfoy. Time to get a move on, old chap. No need to be contrary. You're quite fortunate to be here, you know. Malfoy made no move to leave, and his response appeared anything but conciliatory. Hermione left the table, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I simply don't see the difficulty here, Malfoy was saying as she approached the door. There's plenty of rooms for students to pass. He glanced back at the restive crowd outside the door. Hermione rolled her eyes. Excuse me. She stepped between Ernie and Malfoy and out of the Great Hall, brushing against Malfoy's shoulder. See? She heard Malfoy say. She glared at the students huddled in the entrance hall. Honestly, you're all going to let him keep you from breakfast. This wall of terror surrounding Malfoy was beginning to try her already. 10 house points from each student still out here when I've counted to 3. Hermione had no authority to dock house points, but that didn't stop a mob of panicked students from stampeding through the doors, knocking both Malfoy and Ernie aside and emptying the entrance hall in seconds. "You, Granger, are no fun," Malfoy said, stepping into the entrance hall to join her. "I am extremely fun," Hermione said, looking up at him. "Wait until you read my Ancient Runes essay." "How can you have an Ancient Runes essay? We haven't even had classes yet." "I read it for fun." Malfoy's upper lip quirked. "You haven't changed at all." Hermione rubbed a thumb over the ridges on her left arm that she refused to glamour. "I've changed enough." His amused look faded, and she turned away, feeling strangely guilty as she mounted the staircase on the way to Ancient Runes. Malfoy wasn't evil, no matter what a pack of idiot students thought. His mother had saved Harry's life, and Harry had spoken for the defense at Narcissa's and Draco's trials. Hermione herself had written a confidential letter to the judge in support of Draco. Both Narcissa and Draco had received probation and a year of house arrest, and Draco had the option to serve his year at Hogwarts. She thought suddenly of Narcissa, now alone at the manor since Lucius was in Azkaban for life. The runes classroom was closed and locked, so she leaned against the tapestry and resisted the urge to review the first chapter of a textbook. "Let me see it," Malfoy said. Hermione blinked at the tall blonde leaning against the wall opposite her. "This fun Ancient Runes essay," Malfoy explained in a too patient tone. "Let me see it." She stared at him a moment, then flipped open her bag, extracted a scroll tied with a blue ribbon — all her scrolls were color-coded — and handed it over. He left the wall to take it, tugging the ribbon free with long fingers and unfurling the scroll. "It's written in runes," he said. Hermione smiled thinly. "Trust me, it's funny." "It really isn't," Malfoy said, looking over the parchment. Her mouth fell open. "You can read it." "If you can write it, Granger, I can read it." "I don't believe you. It took me a month to translate that essay into runes. The textbook is rubbish," Malfoy said. "My family's library has a rune manuscript." He chuckled slightly. "All right, that bit about the frog is a little funny." Hermione was staggered. The pompous gid had actually taught himself ancient runes, likely from some impossibly rare book at that Godric-damned manor. She could hardly believe it, but there it was. He obviously knew runes, or at least the rune for frog. She eyed Malfoy thoughtfully as he leaned against the wall again, an impeccable figure in new robe, right down to his silver cufflinks and polished black shoes. A far cry from the haunted figure from his trial. Dark lashes veiled grey eyes as he scanned the pages. He wore his attractiveness like polished armor on a murmuring battlefield. Hermione frowned and looked away. "Get a hold of yourself, for Merlin's sake." Malfoy straightened and rolled up the sheaf of parchments. "You got some shades of meaning wrong," he said, retying the ribbon. "I could mark it up for you if you like." "Nonsense, it's perfectly correct." Malfoy stepped closer, opening her right hand with his and placing the scroll inside. He wrapped her hand around the scroll, covering it with warm fingers before stepping back. "It's not," he said. "Look at it again." Hermione glared. If her runes were incorrect, which she didn't entertain for a minute, it was the fault of that stupid textbook, which was maddeningly vague and so badly printed that what looked like a dot was often just an ink blot. Not everyone had ancient rune manuscripts lying around. "I brought it to Hogwarts, you know," he went on, sounding bored. "The manuscript?" "Of course." She tossed her head. "I don't care." Malfoy smiled mockingly and returned to his own wall as chattering voices echoed through the corridor. McGonagall was sailing towards them, black pointed hat bobbing, trailed by a handful of older students, mostly Ravenclaws and a few Hufflepuffs. If the headmistress was surprised to see the two of them standing there, she didn't show it. "Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy," was all she said, opening the door with a wave of her wand. Another wave vanished half the desks in the classroom, leaving the rest for the 10 students taking advanced ancient runes. "The runic alphabet, as you all know," she began, "is an ancient branch of linguistics, once used by muggles as well, but in our world bearing magical properties." Hermione scratched a few notes, only half listening. Errors in her essay. Impossible! He was just toying with her. Perhaps McGonagall had some text she could look at. She'd ask after class. Anything to avoid asking Malfoy. He was seated across the aisle from her, folded into the laughably small desk, writing on his own bit of parchment, and she could see the writing was in runes. Malfoy was taking notes in runes? That might be a good way to practice. She leaned closer to see better, but then he turned his head and raised an eyebrow. Hermione flushed and straightened. Fine. She didn't care what he was writing. She approached McGonagall at the end of class, waving her textbook indignantly, and the headmistress sympathized with Hermione's plight.
It's a new advanced subject, Miss Granger. Subsequent volumes will be more precise, I'm sure, McGonagall said. Perhaps you would like to have revised the textbook after your notes.
Really? Hermione's pulse jumped. I've already marked portions of the textbook.
Yes,
McGonagall said absently.
You had better run along, Miss Granger. Your next class is in the dungeons, is it not?
Advanced patience, yes, Hermione said. But I wanted to show this essay.
Another time, Miss Granger. You wouldn't want to be late now, would you?
Hermione would have been perfectly fine with being late to advanced patience. Slughorn wasn't going to dock house points from one of his best students, likely his top student now that Harry was no longer around with his cheating textbook. But McGonagall's tone brooked no argument, and she walked briskly out of the classroom and down the stairs, ignoring the constant warnings from paintings for her tardiness. She was the last one in the classroom, with all the stools taken, except, of course, for a single one beside Malfoy at a 2-person table. Apparently, his splendid isolation extended to 7th and 8th years, people old enough to know better. She pulled a stool further from him with a loud scrape of metal against stone and sat down, slamming her books on the table. And just to make a party of it, Ron was staring at them, shocked from his own table with lavender. What did Ron have to be shocked about? That she was late to potions? That she was sitting with Malfoy? That she continued to resist Ron's alluring seduction techniques? Maybe all three. Malfoy gave every appearance of ignoring her, but when Hermione's eyes flickered to their tabletop, she saw a small scroll beside her books, tied with a green ribbon and marked with the rune for H. To be continued. Thank you for listening to The Gloriana Set by ThebeMoon, read by LMX Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on Spotify, YouTube, or AO3.